All right, so the recording has been restarted. Again, apologies there to restart the webinar. If you still have audio connectivity issues, can't hear clearly, I suggest just waiting for the recording that we will be sending out after the webinar. But thanks to those that have joined today on the topic, which I will start sharing my screen. It's on mobile app analytics with Google Analytics. So let's jump right in since we have already eaten up some time just connecting. About the company and myself, the presenter, my name is Amin Shaki. I'm the Regional Managing Director of InfoTrust here in the MENA region. InfoTrust is a web analytics consulting company based in the United States. We're Google Analytics certified partners, premium resellers, tag manager specialist, and we do a number of trainings and webinars like this throughout the year. So we really know Google Analytics inside and out and all of the quirks with it. As I might have mentioned before, on our website, we have many events coming up, many free webinars on different topics around Google Analytics. So feel free to sign up for those. And then, of course, just housekeeping. If you have any questions or comments, just post in the chat pane or questions panel. I'll be monitoring that. A little bit more background just about InfoTrust so that everyone has confidence we know what we're doing. We work with some of the largest organizations in the world, Fortune 50 CPG, where we help them deploy global web analytics architecture across all their websites and mobile applications using Google Analytics and a tag management system. We work with a number of retailers, e-commerce players, media conglomerates, really different types of verticals, but all of which have mobile app usage. So today I'm hoping to cover some of the capabilities and things that can be done with Google Analytics for mobile apps specifically. A little bit more about InfoTrust Capabilities, which I'll be talking about a lot of our different topics here. Our services all around measurement and analytics strategy, implementation. We're really technical, so we know what is going to be required to actually set up tracking, which in this presentation, we will talk a little bit about how to configure mobile app analytics, since that's probably the biggest challenge that we see with mobile app players when they're trying to deploy Google Analytics on their mobile apps. It's the technical limitations or lack of guidance, I guess, with the support documentation. So I'm hopefully going to explain in a simple way how tracking actually works or should be set up. But then we also have our own digital products that aid or sit on top of Google Analytics. And really one thing before we jump in, many of these screenshots will be from the app-specific reports or app-specific setup in Google Analytics, but many of the capabilities with Google Analytics is both for web and app together. So if there's anything unclear here or doesn't say anything about an app, it's because it's available in both properties. I'll try and highlight the app-specific capabilities as well as we go through. So the agenda today, or some of the topics that we will be covering, include some key features and capabilities with Google Analytics for apps, different ways that you can set up the measurement of your mobile apps, and different things to keep in mind, because there are a little bit more configuration steps required compared to web, and then some common challenges and best practices. So hopefully we can get through the entire agenda in the time that we have allotted, but again, feel free to drop in questions as they come along. So to start, we first wanted to talk about how Google Analytics actually collects data. So this is a really good image that we like to use to explain the process that GA goes through. Whenever a visitor comes to your website or mobile application, the Google Analytics code, whether it's on the website JavaScript or the SDK or through a tag management system, it begins to load, grabs information around the device, around your browser or the user's browser, cookies, etc., packages that all up and sends it to Google Analytics to get processed. Now, the key here is that Google Analytics can combine the tracking for app and web together. This was a recent development, relatively speaking. I guess it was in the last couple years, Google moved away from tracking apps and web separately to providing a capability or a method to track them together. So a single web property or a single place that you can send the data to from any different type of platform is now possible. And then at the view level or at the reporting level, you can split or segment by the different device, or whether it's an app or a website or a different operating system, etc. But the key here is that it can be collected together because Google has done a lot of things to unify its the software so that it's agnostic to different platform. So that's one key thing here. Now, it's still doable and possible to track it separately using the SDKs for the apps, iOS, Android, etc., and the JavaScript for the web. But it is also possible to track it together. And there might be some value there, which we'll show a little bit later when you're trying to look holistically across your organization or across your brand. If you have a website and mobile app that are relatively similar, such as an e-commerce shop, you might want to see total users, total transactions, instead of manually aggregating that later on in Excel or just manually in your reporting tool. You can have that all collected in Google Analytics together. And the reason this is possible is because Google has made its reporting platform, Google Analytics, designed, or the architecture behind it, using the same nomenclature and same processing or tracking methodology. And that's simply, or down to the most specific level, tracking dimensions and metrics. We want to go over this because a lot of the reports and screenshots I'm going to show, I'm going to be mentioning these terms, where dimensions are just the attributes or specific data points that are tracked, such as what city a user is coming from or country, what source brought them there, the device type or operating system or browser type, etc. And then metrics is just the way to measure that. So number of sessions, number of screens, time on site or time on in app, things like that. That's how to measure the dimension values themselves. And when you put them together, again, for any web or app, in Google Analytics, dimensions and metrics combined in the table reports brings you insights. Bringing some context to your dimensions through metrics, this is how you can begin to analyze what's working, what's not. And what we're going to be talking a lot about today is how there's mobile app specific reports and how you can leverage those to gather insights about your mobile apps. So to move on, as far as the mobile app analytics and what's possible, you'll notice it's a very similar UI. So for those of you that already have Google Analytics on your mobile app and you have these reports available, a lot of this might be reviewed just on what these reports can do or how to click around. For those that may have never used Google Analytics for your mobile app, hopefully this is going to be insightful for you to see all the capabilities. You'll notice there's, again, a lot of similarities. The general structure is the same between Google Analytics for web as Google Analytics for mobile apps, just with some additional specific reports, such as sources from Google Play, sources from iTunes. There's some information about that marketplace, Google Play referrals. All of these we're going to show screenshots of, but the general bucketing system or split of the reports is the same. You have some acquisition reports, some audience or user reports, engagement conversions, etc. So pretty low learning curve if you're already using GA for web to also add it to your app as far as the nomenclature or reporting suite itself. Here's a screenshot of just the app overview. It's a specific report for app views themselves. And you'll notice that it's slightly different. It shows maybe one additional metric, which is active users, some top devices visually for what users are actually accessing your apps through. But what we're going to spend a lot of time on today is source tracking. There's a common misconception that Google Analytics does not track sources for mobile apps, or it only does it for Google Play, not for iOS, because Apple and Google are not the best of friends. Though that might be true, that Apple and Google don't have the best relationship, or they're not best friends, Google Analytics is still designed to be able to track iOS traffic and iOS install sources. So install campaign tracking, that is still a capability within Google Analytics. Admittedly, there are some limitations where other tools or other systems in the ecosystem like Adjust or Amplitude or things like that might have a little bit more robust source tracking because they have a little bit better partnerships with Apple and other vendors that actually do advertising for mobile app installs. But Google Analytics still has the capabilities, and this is what I'll be going through today. So with Google Analytics, you can see under your property settings that there is an opportunity to link Google Play. Because it's all Google, this enables some automatic data sharing, similar to how AdWords and Google Analytics can be linked up. Google Play and Google Analytics can be linked up both in GA interface as well as in the Google Play store itself and the admin settings that your developers can have access to. So we'll show a little bit of the capabilities once you set up this link, what data can flow in and how that works. But then also iOS campaign tracking. So again, this was released maybe 2 years ago, and it hasn't been as widely adopted or known as it should be, really. Particularly in this region, it's just not as commonly thought of as the central way to track iOS install campaign tracking, but it's certainly doable, and it's been around for quite some time, and Google is continuously innovating this capability here. Now, the way source tracking works, again, it's very similar to the web as far as how the reports will output the data. You'll still have your sources, your mediums, your other parameters, and they'll all power channels. So this setup is, again, the same whether it's in a mobile app view or in a web view, where you need to customize your channel grouping so that whatever the way you're tracking your sources and mediums actually can power those channels appropriately. So same concept applies on our last webinar, which feel free to access on our website, the recording and slides. We went through in depth how to track your advertising campaigns and how to think about your advertising spend and budget for 2016. We spent a lot of time talking about channel groupings and how these work, so I'm not going to spend too much time now. But the concept here is that it is the same from a GA reporting standpoint. The only difference is actually setting it up in your campaigns themselves within the app ecosystem, if you will. So from web, again, just to build some context here, you have the UTM underscore parameters that you can track for certain campaigns or advertising vendors that you're working with. And this is something, again, we went through thoroughly in the last webinar. But the key concept here is that you're adding in these custom parameters. Now for search, for Google paid search or Google organic search, that is automatically tracked, especially with Google Play, so you won't need the UTM parameters. But for links that you control or advertising channels that you're actually actively putting your links back to the Play Store or to the App Store for users to download or install your app, using UTM tracking is key. And with mobile apps, install tracking follows the same process. So it's worth keeping in mind the steps that you normally would follow for web as far as consistency and nomenclature and channel groupings, etc. But just bringing into the app world, where for Google Play, you would link Google Analytics and Google Play and set up your UTM parameters on those links, sending people to the Google Play page for your app to install. And we'll show a little bit some examples how that works. But then for iOS, you would not only need to track using the UTM parameters for different advertising networks that you might be putting links to the App Store for people to install, but you also need to add into your tracking within your mobile application itself this concept of IDFA. So Google Analytics, we're not going to talk too much about the technical way to install it onto your app. We do talk a little bit at the end of the webinar about Google Tag Manager and that approach. But essentially on your mobile app on iOS, there's an identifier for advertisers, that's what IDFA stands for, that you can start tracking as users open up your app or actually load your app. And you can pass it into Google Analytics as well. As long as you identify the IDFA using the process that Google outlines with certain libraries on your iOS app, you can pass that into Google Analytics, and that is the key that will link any click on any iOS advertising vendor back to the actual app open. So IDFA is very, very critical, very, very important. But then, of course, the UTM tracking is still half of the equation for iOS. So to walk through a little bit how iOS can actually use the IDFA and track installs, there's two methods. The first method that I want to go through, and again, this screenshot's from the Google support pages, but I actually want to walk through it. It's with a redirect process. And the redirect process essentially works when a user is browsing different applications or they're using their phone. They see an advertisement for your particular app and they decide to click on it. If they click on that app and you've added in some of your query string parameters, and this particular vendor allows the IDFA to be added in to that URL that a user is clicking on or that link, the redirect method essentially sends the users first to a Google Analytics, essentially a URL that's a Google Analytics URL, just to capture those UTM parameters that you've added in and read the IDFA that was fed in from the particular vendor that user clicked on the link for. And in this quick redirect, I mean, this is unseen by users typically. It's just almost instantaneous. But Google Analytics will read the UTM parameters that you've set, grab the IDFA, and store that in the servers and in the Google Analytics servers. And the reason they do that is they need to wait until the user then comes and installs and opens the actual application on their phone. And when they open their application, assuming you're tracking the IDFA parameter, which I mentioned in the last slide, that IDFA parameter is how Google Analytics will know this user opened up this app, this is their IDFA, and it matches these clicks on these other advertising vendors that drove them to install. So the last one must be the one that actually drove them to install and open the app. So the IDFA parameter is how Google will tie in all the the clicks or the activity off app to the actual app opening using this redirect method here. Now the second method is fairly similar. It's just a ping method. And some vendors are able to do this, or the ad network, where when a user clicks on the ad network advertising link, if you will, to go to the iTunes store to download and install your app, the ad network can grab the query string parameters that have been set and actually ping Google Analytics servers directly, saying this user just clicked on this ad, and here are the query string parameters that you've already set, and here's the IDFA of that particular user. So then again, Google will collect the IDFA and store those parameters with that ping request, and then wait to see when the user actually loads the application and match based on the IDFA what those parameters were that actually loaded the application. So Google Analytics kind of sits between the ad network or the advertising click and the ultimate app install and open. Now, if there's any clicks that happen from an ad network, but the user never installs and never opens, then that attribution won't be there, because Google sees that a click happened with certain source or parameters, but since there was no session, nothing actually tracked in GA from the app itself, it won't display that information for you. So in that case, and this is what we get into a little bit later, what we like to suggest is if you want to see how many clicks and the cost and the impressions for your ad networks, even if they don't drive installs, that's where you can leverage the data import capability and our tool Analyzely to automate pulling in that data. And I'll show what that looks like a little bit later. That's the same process for web as well. So web or app, you can bring in the click, cost, impression data from your ad networks, even if there was no session or app load actually occurring. Okay, let me just check. There's no questions or comments, so I guess I'll go ahead and continue on. Let me just confirm recording is still going. Okay. So in the Google support pages for developers, there is a section where you can build those UTM parameters, because there are a few additional parameters that are required. But you can see here for iOS install campaign tracking, there's several vendors and many more coming that Google has partnered up with that will provide the IDFA, the required parameter to link the install to the actual click automatically. So InMobi is a pretty popular one in this region. MobFox we've seen in the wild as well. There's also capability to set custom parameters with any other vendor that can provide the IDFA within a URL. Basically, when you use the custom parameter or custom setup, you need to tell Google Analytics the URL that you're going to build. What is the macro, or what is the way that the ad network will feed in the IDFA? What is the value that they will, or the name of the attribute that they will feed in the IDFA value? So it's just important to note that there's a lot of automatic connections here, where if you were to choose something like InMobi, when you build the tagged URL or with UTM parameters, it'll actually already have in there the IDFA macro that belongs in that URL string for InMobi to feed in the value. So it kind of does it for you. And again, this list is growing. Again, for full disclosure, other ad networks might have more partnerships, so more automatic integrations as well. But Google Analytics, again, does have quite a few partnerships, and this is constantly growing. And really the value is the fact that Google Analytics both can sit on your app and on your website together, and the fact that it's free. To set up all of this is all the free version of Google Analytics. The premium requirements for Google Analytics Premium or the enterprise version of Google Analytics doesn't have to do with mobile app capabilities, purely on the volume of hits or the volume of sessions, which doesn't matter what platform that's coming from. So with Google Play reports, you can also see installs. So when you link your analytics account and your Google Play developer console, you'll see some data automatically get populated in here. Again, the process is once you link them up, the Google Play page that you have for users to install your app will start sending data into Google Analytics. You still need to use UTM parameters so that the Google Play Store page itself that users can install or download your app from will pick up those parameters accordingly. But you'll see there's a few different parameters, a little bit less, and there's no concept of IDFA needed. So there's, again, more partnerships here and still a custom capability for you to use with any vendor that you might be leveraging to send people to the Google Play Store to drive installs. One cool report that's available because Google owns Google Play and Google Analytics is the Google Play referral flow reports. Basically, since Google Play, when you link up to Google Analytics, you start getting data around your Play Store views. You can see this funnel report here of different sources or channels or ad networks that you might be leveraging as they drive users to the Play Store. And then if it actually drives an install, and not just an install, but actually a load of your app. It's a pretty interesting statistic. I don't have the exact number, but there's a significantly high, as you can even see from this example, amount of users that install but will never load the app, will never actually use the app. So if you just stop at the fact that an install happened, that might not be enough to actually understand if that network was valuable in driving usage, purchases, engagement, etc., whatever your goals are with your app. So this flow report shows that that level of detail once you have Google Play and Google Analytics integrated. So to continue on with the reports, and the next several slides are all just, once you have the tracking in place based off of what we explained earlier, then you can start to see some of these reports here, like the source medium report. Now, the note here that I want to make is that direct traffic is slightly different. And we're going to start getting into the nuances between mobile app and web tracking with Google Analytics. Referrals are actually lumped, organic referrals, if you will, untagged campaigns that you're not using UTM parameters, or clicks from other apps that just happen to be there. You didn't have to solicit or put in the UTM parameters. They'll all get bucketed under direct. So that's why if you can control the ad network link, or you can control where you're posting your different advertisements or promotions to get people to install, it's very critical to use UTM tagging parameters so that it doesn't default, those clicks or those users and sessions to direct. Because direct essentially means the users they went straight to your Google Play or iTunes page to download your app. Now, for some sources like email, at the moment, there's no way to track email clicks to install in Google Analytics because email providers do not have capability to actually provide an IDFA in that click. So all email to download or email to install will bucket under direct none at the moment, since there's no way to actually attribute that click to the install using IDFA for iOS or with Google Play. Another report is the mobile app acquisition reports. The mobile app marketplace. So Google Analytics can recognize using the app installer ID what marketplace was used to actually install your app, whether it was the Google Play Store or something else. Now, in itself, this might not seem as useful, just the app installer ID, because for the App Store with Apple, it's not set. And then with Google Play, it's something like com.android.vending. But when you add some context around the mobile device info, you can see which devices might be driving the most installs or engagement once the user actually loads the app and starts going through it. So that's helpful to see which marketplace is not only bringing users to your app, but if they're actually providing or driving engagement as well. So I mentioned before the concept of data importing and bringing in different metrics around your advertising channels beyond just the fact that a session occurred, someone came to your website or someone loaded the actual application and went through it. But you can also bring in impressions, clicks, and costs. Again, specifically in the app world, you can have significant amount of clicks that users are engaging with to actually get to the Play Store or to the iOS App Store, but never actually install, or they actually install, but they never load the app. So it might be valuable to bring this data in to see if you have significant discrepancy between clicks and sessions, then maybe it's your App Store pages that aren't driving installs, or it might be that after installed, people aren't feeling inclined to actually open up your app. One key thing here that we always like to point out, again, I talked about this extensively in the last webinar. If you haven't seen it or you didn't attend, feel free to check it out on our website, is by bringing in cost data. If you're an e-commerce retail player and you have revenue data, combining the cost and revenue data against one another, you can actually start to unlock other metrics like return per click, return on advertising spend, and actually see the value of your ad spend beyond just the volume. So this example, I'm highlighting social or Facebook social because it's a low level of investment, not a lot of sessions, but the return on advertising spend for this e-commerce retailer is 250%. That's double the return that's coming from Google AdWords, even though Google AdWords has a ton of investment, a lot more sessions. So this is just an example to illustrate that if you were to maybe tweak your advertising spend a little bit, add more to Facebook social, keep the return on advertising spend high, you just drive your margins. So the profitability there is what this is all about. This report's available both in Google Analytics web and app. It's, again, because the dimensions or metrics are standard across both platforms, this isn't only available for one or the other. It's just a matter of where you're advertising. If you're only advertising on applications or for driving installs, or also on web, how you want to set it up between the views. And our tool Analyzer can just automate that, but I won't get into that detail. As is with web, and because Google owns Google AdWords and Google Analytics, there's an auto integration there. So if you're running mobile app advertisements on Google AdWords, all of your campaigns, keywords, really any data from AdWords is can be automatically integrated with Google Analytics, so you can see the engagement metrics or the revenue and conversion metrics in GA around your AdWords campaigns, keywords, and terms. Furthermore, you can also take that one step further and build remarketing campaigns from Google Analytics to pass into your AdWords account to remarket in the app ecosystem. So this is a pretty powerful capability here that not a lot of other vendors have, where you can build very customized lists or audience segments around engagement, what screens people are looking at, or how far they're getting in your game, if it's a game app, or what types of products they purchase or not purchase and just look at. You can still pass their app engagement or build these different audience lists and pass it into AdWords to remarket them as they go on to other applications and continue on using their mobile device. So it's similar to web, but it's also a capability within the app itself. One thing that we always recommend, if your site and app have login capabilities, whether it's an e-commerce platform where users can create an account, or they have to provide their email for guest checkout or what have you, or you're some kind of content site or gaming site, or gaming app or content app that people need to authenticate to get more content, capturing the user ID or some form of a customer ID is very, very powerful. Not only because you can bring in CRM and or external data into Google Analytics and see the offline, online interactions and how they impact, but you can also stitch different device interactions together, which I'll get to here in a second. But one example of how this is used, it's not actually in the screenshot, but if you're pushing or if you're running push notifications on your app for users to come back, re-engage, click on a promotion, check out new products on sale or what have you, anytime you send out a push notification, you know who you're sending that to. You're sending it to an individual user. in theory, if you have a customer ID tied to that push notification, you can bring those metrics back into GA tied to the session, so you can see how many push notifications did we send out to all of our users and how many sessions came out of that. Or what is the correlation between push notifications and sales? That's just one key example. It's similar to email. So if you're sending out emails for people to go back to your app, you can then correlate saying, how many email sends does it take on what days for what campaigns to actually drive or change or influence the engagement in our app, whether it's purchases or screens per session or just different actions that you want to track. So using customer ID tracked in Google Analytics and the data import capabilities, which I mentioned before, you can actually bring in that additional user level metric data and have that user-centric analysis available for you. Beyond that, once you start tracking user ID, you can also enable the user ID views themselves across different platforms. So this might be familiar for some of you, maybe it's new for others, but essentially when you're tracking user ID between your website, your mobile app on iOS or Android, or your tablet, that's a way for Google Analytics to be able to stitch the same user as they go across platforms and actually power these reports here where there's device overlap. So you can see how many users actually access your brand on multiple platforms. And does it drive conversions? Does it drive revenue? Does it drive engagement? You can even see the device path. So if most of your users are coming on your website, do they actually ultimately purchase in-app? And how does that change your marketing tactics? You know, maybe your website's more introductory, where your app is more sales and discounts and promotions because you know users are ready to buy when they're just on their phone. Usually it's the reverse. Most consumers that we've seen do a lot of research on their phone. They browse as they're commuting or when they have some extra time. But then they ultimately make the purchase on their laptop when they have their credit card handy or when they're ready to commit as well. So how does that change what you display in your app versus web? That's what these reports are designed to provide that kind of insight. One thing that's in beta, I think still, is lifetime value reports automatically built for mobile app views. So if you have revenue tracked with Google Analytics, they can see from the first install or from the first load throughout time what is the lifetime value of all of your users, and you can also segment it by channel and other dimensions here. So this report's automatically built for you or available in Google Analytics, particularly if you have revenue data. It might be useful to see as users keep coming back, such as if you're an e-commerce site and you constantly do push notifications of new deals once a week or once every so often. Google Analytics actually has this capability available for you. Another capability in Google Analytics, this is both for web and app, but it might be particularly interesting when you're thinking about how you stack up against your competitors, is the benchmarking reports. So if you enable benchmarking, you'll start to see how your site or app volumes of traffic, not conversions, but volumes and engagement stack up against similar companies in your same vertical, same size, etc. And you can see both by country. So if you, particularly in this region, the MENA region, if you have a mobile application, it's probably not just for the UAE. It's probably for UAE, KSA, Qatar, and others. You can actually see how does your mobile app or how does your brand stack up against other similar companies in the region, as well as similar size. So instead of comparing your mobile app to Amazon, which I'm not sure if you're in e-commerce, or for those e-commerce players on the call, if you're as big as Amazon, congratulations. Most probably are not. You can actually compare it to similar size or similar other companies and see the similarities and differences there as far as how many sessions you're bringing or the level of engagement. And then you can see across which device you might have more engaged users or more volume. And you can start to benchmark where you are and where you need to be. So a few other cool reports. Again, now I'm kind of just showing other capabilities. There's not really a flow from the rest of the presentation, if you will. But you can also track crashes and exceptions. So with a little bit extra implementation with the SDK, you can pass in anytime your mobile application crashes or runs into an exception or an error. If you trigger that to send an event to Google Analytics, then you'll be able to see in the crashes and exceptions reports what types of devices might be driving the most crashes and exceptions. This is especially useful if you're going through mobile app updates, maybe once a month or once every couple of weeks, and you want to make sure that nothing happens. You don't suddenly have a spike in crashes or exceptions because one of the types of brands or one of the operating systems wasn't thoroughly tested enough for the changes coming up. You can actually track that with crashes and exceptions. So at the mobile branding, so you can see Samsung, Sony, etc., to see how many times these are causing errors. And then also you can change that primary dimension here in this report to see other information like the app name. So if you have multiple versions of your app, which is also shown here. You can also track a description of the particular exception. So what you can see here is, for this particular example, we're showing the app version sorted by how many crashes or exceptions that happen, and then a little description perhaps of why. And this is all configurable in the app itself in the SDK by your developers. If they have crash and exception capabilities, you add a new library, you add this tracking, and this information will become available to you, so you can diagnose why you might be having so many crashes or what specific things are occurring, and how does that impact your user's navigation or use of your actual application. So let me just take a quick pause, see if there's any questions. I don't think I see any questions or comments, so we'll just continue on. We have quite a few more slides in about 10 more minutes. Another capability that's similar between mobile apps and the web tracking for Google Analytics is real-time reporting. So these reports are available. You can see in real time people that are accessing your mobile apps. But the note here is that mobile apps work a little differently, where in Google Analytics for web, it's a JavaScript that fires the GIF to or the information to Google Analytics servers and automatically populates here. For mobile apps, there's a different process where hits can be batched or grouped together. So even if a user clicks through 5 different screens, it doesn't necessarily mean that each time a new screen is opened, a screen view hit will be sent to Google Analytics. It could be that all 5 of those will get batched into a single hit or to be sent at the same time. And this is typically to either conserve battery life or just to handle the load, since users can be very engaged in apps depending on how many things you're pushing in. So just keep in mind that with Android and iOS, these are configurable also, how often you want to batch your hits. Particularly if you're using Google Tag Manager, you can set the threshold every 2 minutes, which is by default for, I believe, iOS, or shorter or longer if you want to make sure that it's more efficient for your users. But also if the user doesn't have internet, but your app is still accessible and they can navigate through, all those hits are collected, and as soon as the user is connected back to the internet, all of those hits are sent in with the correct timestamp, so that you can see in the real-time reports if it's within the real-time window. Hits might be coming in a few minutes later, and they might just pop up 5 minutes or so because of the timestamp that's sent in. So that's a little bit more efficient design, so that time of hits are still accurately measured, even if the user doesn't have internet or runs into connectivity issues. We talked a little bit about mobile app version reports. There's just a nice graph here to see the differences, how many users are adopting the newer version and weaning off or upgrading or updating their apps from the older version. So that's all here as well. The version reports, again, similar to any other report in Google Analytics, you can add secondary dimensions, you can sort by different metrics. The table reports are all the same because Google Analytics, again, is constructed the same way with dimensions and metrics together to provide insights. So this might be an example usage of this particular report here. There's also app speed reports, and I didn't want to. I have a screenshot on the next slide here, but there's different capabilities with your app speed reports. So this slide's a little bit more for reference for the recording or the downloadable slides later on. But you can see there's different ways to review the app speed tracking from the time someone first loads the app to actually navigate through. This data can be also tracked with a little bit additional user timing implementation with the SDK. But you can see in an Explorer view, distribution view, or even map overlay. So you can see what parts of the world people are loading your app that have different app speeds or user timing challenges. So you can start to understand, okay, users in this part of the world or using these particular device types or device types, device names are experiencing different app speed issues, and how can we address that? So this screenshot here is just showing you, some distribution as far as the different user timing buckets. So the majority of people have the app fully load within around 5 seconds, which is probably high, where 1 second in the mobile world is an eternity. So this can be a way to immediately see, okay, we need to optimize or improve this particular version of the app. Again, you can segment this particular report, so you can look at just iPhone versus Android, versus what different version or any kind of user segment. If it's new users versus returning, because they might see slightly different content or have different pixels and items firing because they're new and it's their first time loading the app. You can segment this way to see where exactly is there an issue with the user timings and how can we optimize. So segmentation, I think, is what we're going to get to here as well. It's available in all the mobile app reports also. So I'm going to quickly go through the remainder of the slides since we only have a few more minutes. Event tracking is possible in Google Analytics for apps as well. So a question that came up recently in one of my conversations is, how can Google Analytics, or how can I remarket to users based on last action within my app? Well, first of all, you can track any action that happens in your mobile application. This is just a screenshot from one of our clients that have a really good nomenclature for different types of actions that they're doing, such as requesting coupons, registering, adding to cart, things like that. Once you have this tracking enabled, again, within your mobile application, you can not only see how often it happens if it's driving conversion, but if users perform an action and then leave the app, you can build a segment and retarget them as well. Like I mentioned before with AdWords, you can build an audience based off of an advanced segment, pass it into AdWords, create a campaign, and they'll see relevant ads, such as if they clicked on a particular coupon or added a particular product to their cart. As they continue on to other apps, you can re-engage them on that level. This is just an example to show the segmentation applied at the app overview level for different regions. It's not zoomed in very much, but these are different countries in the MENA region. And you can see the differences in device usage. It's all pretty relevant because these countries, these are just the top most popular devices in this part of the world. But just to show an example of the advanced segments, again, the UI and the segment builder is exactly the same. So in our previous webinar, again, we talked a lot about segmentation and how to build these. But with mobile applications, it works the same way. The only difference is that you have potentially different, you have more likely use of app-specific dimensions and metrics as part of your segment. So data source, that's actually a very key dimension that you can use to differentiate app hits versus web hits, particularly if you're collecting data all to one property, which is our recommendation, and you're looking at a view that has both app and web hits. You can isolate just the app hits, isolate the type of app hits, Android, iPhone, your iPad, etc. And you can even overlay just general engagement or usage logic. So in this case, this is revenue per user is greater than $100. So how many users have spent more than $100 on our Android app specifically? And this might be because you want to retarget them on AdWords just for those using Android, a specific promotion for maybe a higher tiered product, because these are special customers. These are the ones that might be spending more than the average customer if they've spent more than $100 in the history there. So you can see it's a small percentage, but protect possibly your key demographic so that you can upsell them and continue getting more lifetime value out of that. Okay, so that was a crash course on all of the different reports and capabilities with Google Analytics for apps. To close out the webinar, I just want to talk a little bit about actually getting the implementation done, or a little bit more about the technical setup in-app. What we always recommend and how we do this with our clients is setting up, first going through your business requirements, coming up with that list, the measurement strategy, doing an audit, understanding what you have set up right now. That's all important. But actually getting the implementation done, I reference a lot of the Google support documentation, which is helpful, but without clear context on which screens and which clicks and what specific actions need specific code requirements, it's hard for the development team to really understand how does that roll up to what the business requirements are or what the ultimate reporting needs are. What we always do is when we come up with the business requirements and the business questions that we want to answer, we then map each business question to a particular implementation. So on this particular screen or these groups of screen, these categories of screens or actions, this is the code that we need because the attributes within it will answer the questions that we have. We always like to use Google Tag Manager. It's both available on iOS and Android. It consists of the same UI setup as the web. You create a new container, whether it's iOS or Android, you name it, but then the triggers, variables, tags are all very, very similar. Google Analytics and DoubleClick right now are template tags that you can add into a Google Tag Manager setup. And then all you would need to do is download the binary file and have your developers implement the SDK for GTM with the binary file. And this will set up the configuration to work with Google Tag Manager. Once you have Google Tag Manager on your app deployed, a key value that's not as known, I suppose, is that if you make any changes within Google Tag Manager to the tracking itself or to anything deployed within Google Tag Manager, you do not need to resubmit to the Google Play or the iOS App Store to have them approve and allow the new upgraded version of your app to be downloaded. So that's really key. Google Tag Manager can accelerate or simplify some of the stuff that you need to push to your app without resubmitting back to the app stores. Particularly for tracking, when you're just trying to track things with Google Analytics, DoubleClick, or other tags, this accelerates the process immensely. So Google Tag Manager is always our recommended implementation approach. Mentioned the IDFA. There's a separate library for that. Can't stress it enough. For iOS campaign tracking, the IDFA component is critical. So highly, highly recommend, especially with Google Tag Manager, there's a special library and framework that you would need to add in for that. All the documentation is quite clear. One key note, though, to understand that's different when you're using Google Tag Manager on app or web. On the web, each page has a new data layer, if you will. You build the data layer each page because when you click to another page, the data layer is wiped and you have to restart the data layer setup to work with Google Tag Manager on each page by page. For apps, the data layer, particularly on iOS, it's actually persistent, meaning whatever you put into the data layer on the first screen, if you don't clear it as you go to the second screen, it's still there. This can bring some significant issues with tracking, particularly in Google Analytics, because if on one screen you track things like the promotions that were shown, or if it's on the conversion page, you're tracking the transaction ID, transaction revenue. If the users continue onto another screen after that, that data is still in the data layer. So on the second screen, or as you continue through the app, you potentially will resend that same data as users continue, even though that data belonged just to one screen. What we recommend, just to make it uniform with the web, but also just for simplicity reason, is clear the data layer after each call, unless there's attributes in there that you know you want to keep throughout the entire session. But if you clear the data layer after each call or after each screen view or click on an event or something like that, then on the next screen or the next action, you set data layer variables, data layer values just on that action or that screen view. It sends to Google Analytics, you track it, and then you clear the data layer again. So you make sure there's no duplication of data as users are navigating through the site, particularly for revenue or order ID, because that can dramatically inflate your numbers. So just a lesson learned from something we've encountered many, many times. The last slide I wanted to show is just from a testing perspective. Now, we have a webinar next week. It's for the US market, but it's 9 p.m. UAE time next, I think, Thursday. It's all about testing and validating Google Analytics. So I highly encourage everyone to sign up for that on our website. This is just one example of how that works on mobile apps for iOS or Android. The best way that we test mobile apps and the hits collected or sent to Google Analytics to validate is using a proxy service. We like to use Charles Proxy, which essentially you connect your computer and Charles Proxy to your mobile device or an emulator. And as you load the app, whether it's a staging app or a live app, as you navigate through that app, you can see the network calls and the network traffic through the proxy, since you're sending it through. and you can begin to test and validate the specific parameters that you know must be passed in. So this is just an example. Anyone can see this is not proprietary for this particular app, that there's a few hits sent to GA. You can see Google Analytics with a few parameters here for some custom dimensions for the page name. So we wanted to validate on this particular screen there's custom data sent properly, or custom metrics, and this is how we would do that testing with Charles Proxy. So again, I'm not going to go into the details because that will be covered in our next event. But with that, again, I've been monitoring the chat pane and question panel. I don't see anything come through. We're just about out of time. I just want to end with a promotion, I guess, of our upcoming events I've mentioned many, many times. Feel free to check them out. They're all free. They're all useful, and they'll be recorded and slides provided. So if you sign up, you'll get an email reminder and notification afterwards of the particular recording. But with that, I guess I'll hang around for about 2 to 5 more minutes if there's any other questions. But I appreciate everyone joining. Thank you so much for bearing with us with the technical challenges earlier on. Hopefully this was helpful, but again, feel free to contact us if you have any additional questions. I'm putting my email here on the screen as well, so feel free to email me directly. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining, and I hope everyone has a great day and a great week. Okay, so we have a question come in. You usually include a disclaimer into the app terms regarding the tracking features. In Europe, advertisers, publishers, etc. must notify all users if they're using web tracking, cookies, etc. Thanks. Yes, that's a really great question, particularly when you're using the IDFA tracking approach. Google has their own requirements on their support documents about how that should work or what kind of notifications you need to do, particularly for different regions. So I can't speak to each and every region, but I know with the IDFA tracking approach, certain regions need a little bit more verification for their users that the IDFA will be used, because that is a unique identifier of the particular user. It's an ID, so it doesn't say their name, social, or anything like that, but it's an ID of their particular device. So there's certainly some privacy or legal implications, particularly for regions in Europe, that might need to be adhered to. So we don't really work in the legal or privacy part of implementations, but the documentation would be around the IDFA specifically for iOS. For Google Play, that would just be whatever the laws and legalities are for Google Analytics on web would go the same for Google Play or Android as well. So yes, we would say that it's required as well, but the documentation on Google support pages probably have a lot more explanation about what is required on apps from a privacy notification standpoint in those regions specifically. Sure. All right, so we'll stick around just about 2 more minutes. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording just so that we keep it under an hour, but I will stick around for maybe 2 more minutes in case any questions come in. So again, thanks so much, guys. I'll end on this slide here for the recording for our upcoming events. And if you're in Dubai, let me know. Happy to meet up and discuss further.